Dr. Anna Zawadzka is a sociologist and assistant professor at the Institute of Slavic Studies of the Polish Academy of Sciences. In her research, she is particularly interested in the intersection of anti-communism and anti-Semitism, and those aspects of the historical politics of post-communist countries that relate to the Holocaust. To what extent is individual, collective, and institutional Jewish life in Poland to this day limited, modelled, and perhaps even determined by anti-Semitism? Is it possible to conduct research in the field of Jewish studies while abstracting from or neglecting anti-Semitism? What are the perils of this? She will reflect on these questions using materials collected during her research for the study Jews in Poland in the aftermath of the 1967 to 68 anti-Semitic campaign, biographical experience, identity changes, and community dynamics.
So everybody's very welcome. So Anna's going to speak on I think she will introduce it better than me, of course, but on the effect that the 1967 and 1968 anti-Zionist campaign against Jews in Poland had on the Jewish community. So how it changed being Jewish in Poland, and how Jews were changed by that event. I remember very well that, to my shame, I had never heard of the anti-Semitic campaign of 67, 68 until I was involved in campaigning against the boycott of Israeli institutions here in Britain. And one of the elements of the boycott at the time was that the boycotters were offering a political exclusion to Israelis so that they wouldn't be boycotted if they agreed to some kind of particular political statement about being in opposition to Israeli apartheid or something like that. And an academic got in touch with me, actually. He was very upset, and he said, this reminds me of what my father had suffered in Poland in 1968. And he explained it to me, and that was how I learnt about it. And we're just muting people. And
no, I was just.
So anyway, that was my own introduction to this topic. And of course, the anti-Zionism that was pushed from the Soviet Union and which was embraced in Poland and also in East Germany in 1968 following the 1967 war was in some ways, which I'm sure Anna will talk about, was in some ways very similar to the anti-Zionism that we see today. So I will hand the microphone to Anna and say to Anna that you're so welcome, and we understand that working on this topic in today's Poland is not entirely easy, and we're very, very happy to host you and to welcome you. Anna.
Thank you, David, for your introduction, and thank you and also the whole London Center for inviting me to the seminar. I have to say that I had an opportunity to take part in a conference in London organized by the center, and I really enjoyed it because the atmosphere there was that you could talk about anti-Semitism without this fear that you will hear that you exaggerate, and it's something completely new to me. I really appreciate that. Today, I will talk about research I participate in, and I also know that among our participants there are two colleagues of mine who are also working on the same project, is Marcin Starnawski and Piotr Forecki. So I hope we can all take part in a discussion. At the beginning, I would like to mention that so far I focused on the non-Jewish majority in my research of anti-Semitism. I was interested in patterns of prejudice, so I was interested more in the way anti-Semitism is rooted in the dominant culture. To do so, I usually analyze the statements of non-Jews. And now I'm doing something else, something new also for me, which is participating in a research project where we talk to people who were stigmatized as Jews. And I'm intentionally saying stigmatized as Jews and not just with Jews, because many of those people, these people did not have a Jewish identity when they experienced anti-Semitic oppression. And I will explain that shortly. These are studies dedicated to biographic experience, identity changes, and community dynamics of Jews in Poland in the aftermath of the 1967-68 anti-Semitic campaign, as David mentioned. And we conduct, first of all, informal, in-depth interviews and also work on written and recorded autobiographical memoirs. We supplement it with press and archive source materials, and the project is in progress. It's not finished yet. So since I have spent last year mainly doing interviews, my observations I will share today come primarily from interviews. First, I would like to briefly tell you what happened in Poland in '68, because I know that the story is not very well known. Then I will present some preliminary conclusions from this research, and I would like to fit those conclusions right along the line of a particular dispute. Broadly speaking, it is a dispute between Jewish studies and studies of anti-Semitism. So the question would be, does anti-Semitism determine individual and collective Jewish life, or does such an approach deprive Jews of subjectivity? Does this perspective of research on anti-Semitism make the Jews seem only as victims without agency? I'm sure that you know this line of dispute because it often echoes when it comes to the history of Zionism. Was Zionism at its root a response to European nationalism and modern anti-Semitism? Was it a defensive reaction to nation states and its dangerous potential? To what extent Israel is a consequence of a history of Europe, of which anti-Semitism was an integral part and is an integral part? In a Polish context, this dispute was heard when the core exhibition of Polin, Museum of History of Polish Jews, opened in 2013. Maybe some of you had a chance to see the core exhibition. Among the flood of praise, there were several critical voices, including mine, saying that this exhibition does not treat anti-Semitism as an integral element of Jewish life. Anti-Semitism is presented there as unrelated incidents and then as a force that comes from the outside and infects good relations between Poles and Jews. As you can guess, it is a narrative that Polish majority desires, and it is sanctioned by the political stewards of memory. This dynamic of majority-minority, the question of symbolic power, the multiple form of violence, including the structural violence, were not problematized on this colossal exhibition. You need a lot of hours to see it all. And in response to this objection, the director of the museum, Dariusz Stola, said, quote, "Let's leave anti-Semitism to anti-Semites. We are creating a museum of life, not death," end of quote. I do not want to spend more time on the museum itself, because I'm much more interested in the question, what assumptions underlie this dispute? Why is putting the matter so that anti-Semitism shapes Jewish life sometimes perceived as ex post depriving Jews of agency? Now I would like to tell a bit about the models of Jewish identity before 1968. Because those models were and are still very different from Jewish identities in United States or in Western Europe. Their history is different, and sometimes it's a bit difficult to translate and explain those models, those patterns from one region to another. So the post-war history is connected to the several overlapping processes who shape those identities. It is estimated that there was approximately 300,000 Jews in Poland after the war, 2/3 of them survived staying in Soviet Union during the Shoah. And by 48, 200,000 Jews had left Poland. The few who remained were people devoted to the Yiddish culture and before the war associated with Bund Party or this part of a communist party that operated on so-called Jewish street. After the war, their goal was to save and reconstruct as much as possible. But most Jews who survived the Shoah and decided to stay in Poland were associated with the pre-war communist movement and operated on so-called Polish street. They were atheists and they were internationalists who rejected national and ethnic identities. And from pre-war times, communist involvement gave them a space of freedom and equality, often at the cost of breaking family ties and, of course, brutal repression from the state, because Communist Party was officially forbidden. Communist activism was officially forbidden. The same people, however, fear the anti-Semitism of Poles. Now, after the Shoah, they want to protect their children from it. They bring them up in the spirit of internationalism. They know, however, that in the Polish conditions, internationalism does not include Jewishness as one of many possible options. Under Polish conditions, communist universalism is not complete. It is adapted to the local situation. So some hide their Jewishness from their children to protect them from the Jewish stigma. After the war, they stay on the so-called Aryan papers, so they do not return to their names and surnames from before the war. And those who are working in the state administration are often even encouraged to do so, because the authorities are also afraid of anti-Semitic moods. They do not talk about their experiences during the war. They do not talk about murdered families. As a result, their children do not know. Sometimes they suspect because someone suddenly calls their mom by her pre-war name, or because dad has unusual culinary habits, or because everyone at school has grandparents, but they only have parents. Often children find out by accident, most often from anti-Semitic slurs someone called them on, or from secretly reading papers they found in home drawers. At home, their Jewishness is either an ancient past of a deceased family members or a parent's secret. And in 1968, none of those structures could be maintained any longer. So now I will talk about what happened in March. In March, in 68, or between 68 and 69, about 15,000 people stigmatized as Jews were expelled from Poland. And how did it happen? So I need to start from the 60s. Second half of 60s in Poland is marked by three parallel processes. The first was the growing conflict within the Communist Party between the nationalist fraction and the old school communists who had grown up on the communist ethos of the International. The second is the growing mood of rebellion among the intelligentsia, metropolitan student youth, against the restriction imposed by the state. And those restrictions are mainly in the cultural sphere. So it's about censorship of press and performances. And then the repressions against them culminates in March 68, hence the term March. The third is the escalating anti-Israel campaign unleashed by the Soviet Union. In June 68, in response to Six-Day War, following the example of USSR, Polish government breaks off diplomatic relationships with Israel, intensifying its anti-Zionist propaganda campaign. At the same time, it is launching anti-Semitic initiatives. Editors of Jewish magazines, creators of Jewish culture, directors of Jewish institutions are forced to make public statements against Israel. Those who refuse to comply lose their jobs. Individuals qualified, for example, on the basis of the sound of their surname as Jews, are removed from the army. And the Polish press escalates the atmosphere of suspicion against, quote, people of Jewish descent, unquote, claiming that they may be disloyal to the Polish state and secretly rooting for Israel. In response to the student protests, to these rebellion moods, the government harnesses the already intense anti-Semitic propaganda to create the internal enemy. The student opposition has been portrayed as strangers, meaning Jews, who are destabilizing the country because they don't feel connected to it. They don't have they are not loyal to it. So therefore they should leave and go to their real homeland, meaning Israel. Not wanting to use overtly anti-Semitic vocabulary because country was officially against racism, politicians and journalists called them not Jews, but Zionists. Stigmatized as untrue Poles or fake Poles, people mostly coming from fully assimilated secular Jewish communist homes are summoned for interrogation, lose their jobs, and experience harassment from the police, security officers, colleagues, and neighbors. The younger ones, born after the war, often, as I said before, don't even know they have Jewish origins until they hear anti-Semitic gossip. In Holocaust survivors, the war's memories are revived. They become persona non grata in their social circles because connecting with them, having social relations with them comes with a risk of unpleasant consequences. The authorities strongly urge disloyal citizens, it's a quote, to leave the country. As a result of these processes, some, as I said, 15,000 people of Jewish background emigrate from Poland. Most of them with the status of stateless refugees, because in exchange for a travel document, offices deprived them of Polish citizenship before they left. And a few thousand Jews who for various reasons could not or choose not to leave, not to emigrate, remained in the country. And now, why we decided to focus on this particular group. There is a relatively large amount of research and also publications on the so-called March emigration, the emigration of '68. There are biography books, interviews, memoirs, theater pieces, documentaries, feature films, and even poetry about those who left. Our research focuses on those who stayed because they sometimes call themselves the undeparted or the unmoved. They feel that they are not represented and left out regarding '68. They feel as they were relegated to a double shadow, as Jews and as those who did not leave. This category, the undeparted category, speaks for itself. In the history of Jews, March of '68 marks another wave of emigration, third one, forced by anti-Semitic persecution. As a result, even if someone has not left, to this day, they establish their biographical narrative and identity relative to this departure. The departure, undertaken or not, become a turning point in everyone's life. Considering the departure, discussing it with family and friends, the need to decide, the need to explain the decision, saying goodbye to friends leaving, answering the question, why didn't I leave, to one's children or to self, sometimes regretting the decision to stay in the country at the time. All of this is a permanent element of contemporary Jewish households in Poland. It is a story of undeparture and not leaving, like going away, sometimes lasted for several years. One of our interviewees said that she and her husband had suitcases packed for 2 years, observing the social moods. Are they getting worse enough to foresee a pogrom and run away? Or can you still wait, hoping that things will calm down? Another interviewee said, quote, I have never stopped packing my bags, unquote. Since '68, the question stay or go has constantly accompanied her. Many families dispersed around the world. Children often left, parents stayed. There were cases where a wife left and a husband stayed. Many of our interviewees lost their environment and friends in '68. And to this day, they feel they have a feeling of emptiness and after losing them. Many keep in contacts with migrants, which before the internet took quite a lot of effort. Most of them wrote letters to each other because international phone calls were really expensive, and also they were wire-trapped. One of our interviewees said that she and her friends recorded cassette tapes for a friend who had left. In these voice letters, they told her what was happening with them, about the situation in Warsaw and in Poland. They sent her those tapes by mail. Others met with emigrants in Bulgaria and Romania on vacation, because this was the place that people both from Israel and from Poland could travel. Polish authorities did not want to let the 68 migrants to Poland because they were called subversive, they were dangerous, and did not want to issue permits for tourist travel to Israel for those who stayed. So that's why they tried to meet. They were trying to meet in Bulgaria or Romania during the holidays. Just a second. If it comes to 68, I think it's not too much to say that it is usually associated with the radical left. In the West, we think about 68 as an intensification of emancipation processes. But in Poland, the anti-government opposition was utterly different. It was primarily anti-communist and intellectual, which in the 1970s led to its alliance with the Catholic Church. Young activists from big cities formed this alliance first. Coming from secular homes mostly and having so far identified mostly as leftist, they made a demonstrative turn towards Catholicism as the force to unite with to defeat communism. At the beginning of 1980s, the Solidarity movement, Solidarność, led by Lech Wałęsa, sealed this alliance. From the very beginning, Solidarity was quite full of Catholic rhetoric and symbolism. Then a new obviousness was born. Whoever did not participate in a Catholic life supported the communist authorities. Jews, whether from households with preserved Jewish traditions or completely secular ones, were stereotyped as part of Jewish Bolshevism, therefore suspect per se. They felt compelled to prove more strongly than others that they were not communists. Due to social pressure, they baptized their children, married in the church, organized Catholic funerals for their relatives, participated in Catholic masses and meeting with Pope Karol Wojtyła. They sent their children to religious institutions provided by Catholic priests. At that time, Catholic priests again became a part of a social life of the intellectual elite, just like before the war. The anti-communist opposition anointed them as the only moral authorities, the effects of which are visible until today. Jews knew very well the historical role of the Catholic Church in promoting antisemitism. Their families experienced it, as did they. Nevertheless, they worried that by refusing to approve the church's leadership and participate in Catholic rituals, they would be branded as communists, as not committed enough to the cause of a democratic opposition. Zealous anti-communism as an attitude expected of Jews is again something that you can still observe in Poland. It is even more problematic than it seems, because notwithstanding all the abuse of that period, the communist government was the first to introduce equality in Poland and penalize anti-Semitism. Limiting the hegemony of the Catholic Church is in the social and cultural spheres and normalizing secularism also ensured greater security for minorities. It created a more inclusive framework to be later narrowed down to the Christian framework by the democratic opposition. The vast majority of our interviewees who were born before 68 remain secular. They describe themselves as atheists, sometimes agnostics. They are also skeptical about Christian conversions to Judaism. Why? Because among Jews, they are looking not for religious community, but a community of experience and memory. The Jewish identity is often ambivalent, self-questioning, very fractured and incomplete, and they talk about it openly. Their self-reflective narratives repeat 3 points of reference for their biography. It's Holocaust, March of 68, and Israel. A sense of Jewishness is tied around those 3 pillars. When it comes to the Holocaust, many emphasize that Jewishness is their duty to remember family members murdered during the Shoah. As for March 68, it was the 3rd wave of forced emigration after the war. The first one took place right after the war, between 45 and 48. The pogrom in Krakow in 1945, the Kielce pogrom in 1946, mysterious disappearances of Jews who were trying to come back to their towns and villages, plundered Jewish property, and post-war anti-communist guerrillas whose actions took form of ethnic cleansing against Jews, but also Belarusians and Ukrainians. All this, as you can imagine, caused the vast majority of Holocaust survivors to emigrate as early as possible. The second wave of emigration is the end of Stalinism, and with it, the accusation of Jews that they are guilty of Stalinist crimes. In the years 1956-57, the stereotype of Jewish Bolshevism, very popular in Poland to nowadays, was used to attribute responsibility for Stalinist period, recently officially discredited to the Jews. The message was translated into violence and caused another wave of emigration of Holocaust survivors. And this was the emigration of about 30,000 people. 10 years pass, and then 1968 begins. It ends with another exodus. So from this perspective, it's quite easy to understand why our interviewees say, quote, Israel is more to me than just another country in the world, unquote. Israel is a place where they have family members and they have old friends and are also guaranteed to be safe. They did not want and do not want to move there. They say, quote, before 1968, Israel did not exist to me. Or Israel, yes, but it was far away, somewhere I couldn't even tell exactly where. Or Israel wasn't a realistic prospect for me, unquote. Some did not emigrate because in the 60s, they had an anti-Zionist and anti-capitalist attitude. Some of them were also communists. One of our interviewees said, quote, I couldn't imagine asking for help from a country whose system I criticized and wanted to continue criticizing, end of quote. After 68, almost everyone shared a positive attitude towards Israel as a country of relatives, but also as a country just in case. One might say that if someone did not experience the Holocaust or did not experience anti-Semitism like in 68 firsthand, then their life is not determined by anti-Semitism or by this. But the question is, I mean, I'm not sure if this is true. And also, I would like to focus on what does it mean firsthand. Let's consider the reports of anti-Semitic incidents in the country where one lives, or stories by family and friends about anti-Semitism they experience. Anti-Semitic comments from school or work colleagues, neighbors, and non-Jewish spouses, family members, which was also quite often among our interviewees. Anti-Semitic statements in the media. Does all this, even if it's not directed at a specific person, not affect the quality of life of Jews and their life choices? Our research indicates that Jewishness in Poland is a constant reality check and testing the water, looking for safe spaces, a safe school for children, a safe neighborhood, a safe workplace are constant elements of a Jewish life today. When I say safe, I do not mean the fear of terrorist attacks, but the fear that their child will hear in the yard, you Jew, or that on the way to the kindergarten, they will pass by a graffiti with the Star on David on the gallows. And yet, the sentence that repeats like a mantra in our interviews is, I quote, I personally did not suffer from anti-Semitism, unquote. This is what people who even survived 68 in Poland say about their biographical experience. Every time I hear that, I wonder then what, in their opinion, would have to happen for them to allow themselves to say that anti-Semitism has affected them firsthand. Does the news that my friend was beaten up, the immigration of a member of my family, or the openly anti-Semitic speech of the head of a state broadcast nationwide on television, like happened in 68, does that not affect personally? Our interviewees instinctively downplay anti-Semitism. I think there are at least two reasons for it. First, the downplaying of this type is forced upon them by the anti-Semitic stereotype that Jews are oversensitive about themselves and see manifestation of anti-Semitism everywhere. So this stereotype, quite strong in Poland, makes Jews feel obligated to keep silent about their harm. Like any stereotype, it is constructed with the double bind. If you don't say anything, you will maintain the fiction that nothing happened, that everything is fine. You keep silent. Instead, it builds an atmosphere of consent. But if you speak up, if you say something, then you will just confirm the stereotype about yourself, so your words will be not taken seriously. And I think this double bind shapes this statement of not experiencing anti-Semitism. And secondly, and here I come back to this dispute over to what extent anti-Semitism determines Jewish life, this mantra comes from the need for agency. The reluctance to play the victim role because such is associated with passivity, objectification, and powerlessness, with being exposed to the world, but not acting towards the world. Some of our interviewees were active participants in the anti-censorship protests in '68. They experienced repression both as opposition activists and as Jews. When asked how they perceive '68 in retrospect, they say that for them, it was a time of a political awakening and joining anti-communist activism. They remember with horror the police repressions against their non-Jewish colleagues, but anti-Semitism, they usually marginalize it. One of our interlocutors said that it was a fight for freedom for her, and she would not let anyone reduce herself to being Jewish. In other words, I treat the declaration, "I have not been personally affected by anti-Semitism," as one of the strategies towards anti-Semitism. Individually, downplaying the violence experienced is a way of dealing with it, an attempt to neutralize it. From a broader perspective, however, you can call it symbolic violence as defined by Pierre Bourdieu. It's reinforcing social violence on oneself, a manifestation of dominance that results in self-inflicted violence. In conclusion, I would like to say that this association of powerlessness and objectification and then the loss of dignity should force us again to take a critical look at the construct of contemporary subjectivity. Despite the depth of the emancipation processes we have observed in many fields and for many years, it is still the subjectivity that grew out of a false universalism. From a sociological point of view, our life is much less free than we think. We are subject of multiple intersecting allocations. So anti-Semitism you can treat as one of the determinants of social life, and it often has the power of structural conditioning. The less transparent we are from this structure, because we carry some stigmas, the greater the power of these conditions. It is a misconception to perceive those whom social world makes vulnerable as less efficient, creative, and independent. But ignoring someone's stigma in social life, or even more so in an academic description or academic analysis, is not a way for stigma to lose its power. The question remains, however, how to reconcile the narrative of my interlocutors with the external dictionary I use to talk about their narratives. This question haunts me. Thank you.
Anna, thank you so much. Just let you breathe for a moment. There are a couple of questions in the chat. Maybe I can invite the people who ask the questions in the chat to ask them in real life if they're not too shy. And in the meantime, let me go to Richard and invite you to ask your question, Richard.
Hello, good evening, everybody. David and Anna, thank you very much, Anna. Just a couple of questions about Poland, which is a country that I've been to on several occasions. What's the current Jewish population of Poland? And was there not an improvement in the perception of Polish Catholics to Jews after Karol Wojtyła became the Pope?
Shall I answer immediately, or shall I collect questions and then answer all together?
Yeah, I think because there's no big rush of people to talk, please do address the question if you'd like to.
All right. Thank you, Richard, for your questions. So I have to say that I don't know what is the count of Jewish population in Poland right now. Maybe Marcin Sternawski, who is with us, know it already. Marcin, do you know it? Because there was recently there was a national survey also on the self declarations of the ethnic identity and religious identity, but I don't know the results yet. Marcin, sorry for...
Okay, since you, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Since you asked me, good evening, everybody. No, we don't know. There was a national census last year, but they are still working on the results. So we don't know. The previous one in 2011 provided the number of 7,000 to 8,000 people declaring they're Jewish in Poland. So.
Okay, thank you.
Although still, even the previous one in 2002, there were only 1.1 thousand people declaring Jewishness. So, well, there could be another question what that indicates, that there is a growing number of such declarations. Yeah.
Thank you, Marcin. Yeah, and if it comes to Karol Wojtyła, this is quite complicated. I think it's, I'm sorry for oversimplifying it, but I think it's more like the approach of Karol Wojtyła to the Jewish community or to anti-Semitism in Catholic Church. It's more a part of a Catholic self-presentation as more open and more tolerant than it used to be before. But if it comes to the shapes of stereotypes, I wouldn't say that there is like a simple connection between changes of patterns of prejudices and Karol Wojtyła activity. For example, the blood libel is still quite vibrant in Poland, and there are also new prejudices or new superstitions against Jews, which are kind of a mixture of modern and pre-modern anti-Semitism. So Karol Wojtyła is definitely among Catholics. He is perceived as a person who changes something because he was so tolerant towards Jews, but the frame of this majority-minority dynamics and the frame in which the Catholic Pope has to tell Polish people what to believe in didn't change at all.
Okay, thank you.
Marek, would you like to just ask the questions that you raised in the chat?
Yes, thank you very much. Good evening. No, that's a terrific talk, and I can see it's a very, it's quite a wonderful research approach to address people's memory and things going back decades. Okay, two questions. I'm sorry if this is a basic question, but I don't know, in the last 20 years or so, whenever here in the UK, I have attended a Holocaust survival commemoration in England, I have come across the situation that among the survivors, I've seen examples of name changes pre and post-war among the Polish origin survivors of the Shoah. I think you alluded to this in your talk. Can you please just clarify, because this has puzzled me? Perhaps it's a basic question, I'm sorry, but about how these name changes came around. I've seen this among the Jewish survivors who have survived into the UK, from Polish sounding names to more Hebrew sounding, but some would be quite comfortable to go back to their Polish names, but I did not want to push it too far. Can you comment?
But can you please just, because maybe I didn't understand, do you mean the changes from Polish sounding names to the British sounding, or the Hebrew, the Jewish sound names? Okay.
Yeah, from Polish names to Hebrew sounding names, yes.
Right.
For example, there'd be a photograph of someone from a school in Poland in the 1930s in Łódź or in the Kresy, you know, and they would have more from a town rather than a rural area, and they'd have a Polish sounding name. And then after they arrived in the UK in the late 1940s, they would have a Hebrew sounding name, or they would adopt a Hebrew sounding name.
Mm-hmm. This process and how it goes on in UK, I must say I don't know, but actually the changes of names and surnames, it's a big issue among the Jewish community in Poland, and it's a very long story, from at least from 19th century. So first of all, like before the war, it was very much about the local regulations and laws. So, for example, to register the newborn baby in particular offices, Jewish parents sometimes were forced to give them Polish name instead of the original Jewish name they wanted to name them, and sometimes also if they even gave Jewish name to the authorities, to the clerks, they would anyway write down the Polish name in papers. So it was already like, it was just like a beginning of the mess in this subject. Then we have another, let's say, level on it is the so-called Aryan papers. So people who managed to survive Shoah in Poland, and some of them they could do it because they had a chance to have Aryan papers, meaning they were pretending to be Poles, like, or non-Jewish Poles. So they had new fake or new papers with Polish names and surnames, and a lot of them decided to stay on those papers after the war. So they didn't come back to their original Jewish names and surnames after the war. Then there was another level which is connected with Jewish with people of Jewish origins who were working in administration after the war. So administration authorities, they didn't want Jewish people to have Jewish sounding names and surnames, those who were working in public administrations, because the authorities were afraid of the stigma of Jewish Bolshevism. They were afraid to be not legitimized as too Jewish. So they were also like pushing people to stay with their Polish names, or even change their Jewish names into the Polish sounding names and surnames. I can imagine that for and nowadays when we again observe very ambivalent process of so-called Jewish revival, some people also decide to go back to their Jewish surnames and names, especially after they parents, grandparents murdered in Holocaust. So some of them, they do it as a kind of a political gesture, also as a kind of access to the new identification, or to come back to the original identification of a family. So I can also imagine, that's just my guess or my first thought about what you say about UK, that this is maybe it's, you know, when you emigrate from Poland, when you were forced to pretend to being a non-Jewish Pole, maybe you can just maybe you finally feel free enough to get back to your Hebrew name, for example, or to get back to your Jewish identity, or to expose your Jewish identity, because you are not afraid so much as in Poland to stay on Aryan papers.
Right, because the pre-war registration of Polish-sounding names for Jewish people, was that actually a decree from the Sanacja government, or was that local interpretation?
It was both. I'm referring not to sanacja government, but more to the mess, which, because Poland before the First World War was in partition, and the regulations, the local regulations of administration were completely different in those three regions. So it brought a lot of mess if it comes to the papers, and then there were also just like local, let's say, bad will of offices and administrators who were obligated to register newborn Jewish babies.
Okay, and I guess the administrators after the war who are preferring to have Polish sounding names, that would have been, you are referring to the Bierut era, I assume.
Yes, yes.
Sure. Okay, perfect. Thank you. And can I just sneak in, I'm sorry, a second question. The Jews who were expelled from Poland in 68, 69, via the Communist Party decisions from the Gomułka Moczar power struggle, did the expulsions focus on purely Polish Communist Party members, or did it actually affect a range of Jewish citizens in Poland, regardless of whether they were Communist Party members or not? That has always puzzled me.
Definitely the second.
Right. Thank you. Brilliant. Thank you very much for your time. And I'm sorry to everyone that I asked so much. I will keep quiet now.
Thanks, Marek. I think Marcin was next, and I was trying to find you when you were talking earlier on, Marcin, but I couldn't find you, but here you are now.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Just a very quick comment to the previous question and a question to you, Anna. On the names, actually the post-1968 exiles from Poland also tend to, well, of course, it's not extremely common, but it happens, especially, for example, in Israel, that they change their Polish names into Hebrew names. Either the first name or sometimes also the last name, and we can explain it as perhaps one way, probably quite plausible way of explaining that would be it's a way of handling the stigma, which goes two ways, kind of depolonizing oneself, so detaching oneself from the previous Polish identity, and affirmation of Jewish identity, yeah, which is actually quite common among the exiles that I've studied before, and we also hear stories of exiles in our research too. And to Anna, I would like to ask you about the opposition story, because opposition story is not everybody's story, and we also interviewed people outside big cities, especially outside of Warsaw, where this narrative is perhaps most prominent, but we interviewed people in smaller towns, people of more of a working class background, perhaps. So that would be one thing, and maybe you would like to tell about this. But with opposition story, there's this aspect that the experience of 1968, of March 1968, becomes universalized within the broader political picture, in which there's a focus on the students' opposition movement, the party response, but the Jewish experience, the stigmatization, and then the consequences of the anti-Semitic campaign, well, they are maybe not erased completely, but sometimes they tend to be marginalized and treated as just one aspect, one of many aspects, and not necessarily the most central one. And this is actually the narrative of some of the undeparted, in fact. So could you please elaborate maybe on that, and also how that perhaps affects the representation of the past, and the main patterns of memory?
Thank you, Marcin, for your question. I think you could also elaborate on that, because it's also your topic, but the topic of your expertise. But yeah, I think it's a very important question because of the issue of representation, exactly. And this is why I said also that the undeparted, this group who call themselves this by this term, they feel unrepresented or not represented enough in the let's say collective memory or of the Polish society, or also in the official commemorations, because there is this a very specific mixture of remembering about the repressions against student opposition movement and repressions against Jewish people or people stigmatized as Jews. And I would say that even among the metropolitan intelligentsia who were participating in the students' opposition movement, they feel that there is no clear connection between those two subjects, and there is a kind of a manipulation in between those two subjects in the official commemorations. But I think it's yeah, I think maybe we can talk about it a bit later. Maybe you also have some observations on this. I just now I have in my mind this one of the conversations we had. One of our interlocutors said, yeah, there is this, you know, this main topic of opposition and anti-communist activism, and then on the side between us Jews there is this topic of anti-Semitism. And I think this was kind of a interesting picture of how they see how it is presented nowadays. There is no integral, no integral narrative about those lines of events.
Thanks, Anna. There's somebody with a question who has a rather opaque name on their screen, but they have now disappeared. So I will go straight to hello.
Sorry. Yes, my name is Henrik Baran. Thank you for a very interesting presentation. It's particularly interesting for me since it's almost autobiographical. My parents and I left Poland in December 1959. So one of the pillars of my Jewish identity, of course, is the Holocaust and anti-Semitic tradition from before the war. But a number of my friends ended up, people I went to school with, ended up leaving, some to Israel, some to Sweden, in fact. I don't know if you had a chance to interview people who went to Sweden. It was sort of a distinct group in and of itself. I had a couple of quick comments, if I could, on the issue of names in the three petition areas. The tradition, after all, or the practice, was that the religious community registers the name. So you know, the local officials, at least during the partition period, did not interfere particularly, as far as I know. I think that the practice kept, you know, was kept up during the interwar period as well. You know, the responsibility is of the Jewish community to keep the so-called Księgi Stanu Cywilnego. The second immigration that took place in the post-Bierut, post-Stalin period, I think it should be added, one should add that it was strengthened by people coming back from the Soviet Union, people who had been deported and then were allowed to return after the fall of the Bierut government. A number of them passed through Poland and went on elsewhere. And my last comment concerns the stereotypes that you spoke about in the current situation, isn't the growth of such stereotypes, such as blood libel, distinctly connected with the policies of the current Polish government and the strengthening of such propaganda centers as Radio Maria and the Catholic University of Lublin, which has become transformed into something quite unpleasant. And let me stop at that point and really thank you again for a fascinating talk.
Thank you so much, Henrik. Poitra, how do I say your name?
Yeah, but maybe Anya would like to add something to the previous question, so I can wait with my question or just with my comment. Anya, the floor is yours.
Yeah, David, would you like me to collect now questions and then answer, or shall I answer now?
Absolutely, as you wish. If you want to respond, then please do.
Okay, so maybe I will respond now, and then Piotr could also say his comments. So yeah, thank you very much for your comments. I already, when you say that you emigrated with your parents in 1959, right? Yes. So can I ask you, was it this wave of emigration after the end of Stalinism, like the October emigration, or was it not connected to it?
No, it was not connected.
All right.
My parents had thought, especially my father, wanted to emigrate from early on in the post-war period. My mother was very ambivalent about it. She would have preferred to stay, in fact, and I think she would have had a very unpleasant experience in '68. But my father was pushing. We had relatives, distant relatives in the US, and they facilitated emigration. But my parents, in fact, had been planning to move to Israel. At one time, they had Paraguayan visas, all kinds of, options.
Right. If it comes to to Jewish people who emigrated to Sweden, I think Marcin Sternawski is a good person who can talk about it, because his research was precisely about the people who emigrated in '68, and a lot of them emigrated to Scandinavia. So Marcin, maybe you could later on answer to this question. Then if it comes to the partition and the regulations about the names, yes, you are absolutely right. During the partition, it was, like you said, it was under the religious, it was the duty of a religious institutions to register, but it changed after the First World War, after the new after the unification of Poland in 1918. And then the regulation was that only the newborn babies who were registered in Catholic Church were automatically also registered by the state. So the religious registration was also automatic in a let's say secular registration, but also only in cases of Catholic on baptized in Catholicism. If it comes to any other religions, including Judaism, everyone has to go both to everyone in a part of the religious registration. They also had to go to the secular institution, to the offices. So they had to register the newborn babies twice, and the effect of this process was quite disturbing, because, for example, in Łódź, which was a place of a huge Jewish community before the war, more than a couple thousand of Jewish people didn't exist officially because they were not registered twice. They were registered only in a religious institutions. Why? Because people were not educated, or for example, they didn't speak Polish. They spoke only Yiddish. They couldn't. They didn't sometimes know, or they couldn't go to the secular institutions. So they were not registered by the state. And if it comes to the current Polish government and let's say growing nationalism and conservative Catholicism in Poland, my point of view is quite specific. Yes, of course, this government, this atmosphere doesn't do anything, let's say, to confront anti-Semitism or to do something with all those issues I was talking about, but in my opinion, it's a very long process, and it's not I think the current government, it's a kind of an effect. They just harness the effects of the previous governments and the previous governments who for many years ignored the issue. So I wouldn't say it's like a new something new out of a blue, or a new atmosphere that didn't exist before. I think it's more about very deeply rooted, very strong processes deeply rooted in the Polish culture.
So-called mother's milk.
Yeah. Thank you.
No.
Okay, now it's my turn. Thank you. Thank you very much for an invitation and organized so important meeting. And thank you, Anna, for a great speech. It's always nice to work with you. And I would like to add something to this plot referring to the issue of names also. Something, maybe it is absolutely obvious for all of you, but I think that we have to also add that these ways of, cover hidden names, changing names, in fact, in the during this anti-Semitic campaign, and even earlier or later, was absolutely unsuccessful for those people in this way, that their surroundings, their neighbors, or even different people from their work, they were absolutely, or in general, of course, aware of their identity or their origins. And in many cases, our interviewers, they told us about it, that they even known about it, but their neighbors, for example, or just other people were aware of their identities or their origins. Maybe not identities, just origins. And this is also very interesting thing. I'm now in the process of listening to many interviews given to the Shoah Foundation in the beginning of 90s. And for us also, it's a very important source because it's a kind of generation gap, because most of our interviews are the people who were born after the Second World War or just during the war, but they represent a kind of a younger generation. And for example, I found the two testimonies of the two people who were orphans, and they did not even know about their origins directly after the war. And they have adoptive parents. And one of this man who told the story when he was condemned to the chief of the human resources. He was a Polish militia worker. And he was accused in 68 of hiding his Jewish origin, because in his personal file, he pointed out the names of his adoptive parents. So this is also a piece of story about the names and about the surnames. And I have a question to Anya. maybe a little bit provocative, and but mostly also referring to my own research and writing on this topic, because the organizers decided to portray today's lecture with the photo taken from the funeral of victims of pogroms in Kielce. My question to you is, in which way you think that this word is the proper word also to describe the experience of Polish Jews during this anti-Semitic campaign? Because we know from our interviews that the scale of violence was terribly high on the different, and the patterns of prejudice and the patterns of this violence were very different. And of course, I remember one discussion with the one famous Polish scholar who said that you can't take into the account, for example, strokes or heart attacks or suicides, because it's a not direct effect of this campaign. So my question, the simple question is to you, how do you think that this particular word still has a kind of sense to describe these events? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Piotrek. Yeah, this is, I think, exactly the point I was trying to refer to what extent the knowledge about previous anti-Semitic events in the country you live in shaped the way your choices, your life choices, the way you live, the level of your insecurity or anxiety. And imagine that pogrom in Kielce is 1946. It's a pogrom done by a Polish mob or Polish community on Jewish people gathering in one building in Kielce and preparing themselves to leave to Palestine. And March happened 22 years later. So it's 22 years from now. It's like it's the year 2000. 2000, you remember 2000 very well, right? It doesn't feel like it was really far away. It was a long time ago. So it's a very fresh past. So I imagine that if you experience, let's say, March 68, if you experience anti-Semitic official nation-provided anti-Semitic campaign in 68 as a person with or without Jewish identity, of course you have in mind what happened 20 years ago or 22 years ago. That's why some of our interviewees said we were observing all the time. It was almost like, you know, watching news 24 hours a day to recognize what is the atmosphere. Is it time to run away, or can we still stay? So yeah, this is exactly the question, like how you can estimate it, and what does it mean firsthand, or what does it mean to experience anti-Semitism if you live in a country when anti-Semitic waves are kind of a constant cycle in the current history.
Laura, would you like to ask your question? Where are you, Laura?
Yes, hi, I'm here. Can you hear me? Yeah. Well, thanks so much for the talk. It was extremely interesting. And I have two questions, one concerning the past and one maybe the present. So the first one would be, what would you consider is the function of anti-Semitism in the socialist ideology, especially in that time in Poland? Would you consider, is that intrinsical to this kind of socialist ideology or communist ideology? Would you rather say it was a rational choice of prejudice to just use to get rid of some enemies? That would be the first question. The second one would be, what would you consider the relics of anti-Zionism in Poland today, today's political landscape, where somebody already asked about the ruling party, but what about the more progressive or leftist parties? To be honest, I haven't observed any, let's say, pro Zionist or pro-Israel opinions in Poland's political landscape at all? And would you say that it's maybe a consequence of the historical experience of anti-Zionism being seen as a legitimate way to issue one's anti-Semitism in Poland's history? So that would be my two questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Social ideology and anti-Semitism and its function. Yeah, it's a super important question to me. And the answer is very ambivalent. It's not easy. It's not simple. It's I would say in this 50 years. So I think there is no one answer or no one response, because this 50 years of socialism, or let's say socialism in Poland, was not a monolith. It was not like a constant. It was not like a one stage of socialism. It was changing, and the dynamics of those changes tells us a lot about anti-Semitism, I think, and also the so. From my perspective, but this is really like, of course, you will meet a lot of people who would argue with me, but I think what happened in Poland just after the war was a kind of a communist revolution, and it was an attempt to change Polish mentality also towards internationalism and against anti-Semitism. It was the first time in Polish history, I would say, that anti-Semitism was really problematized, and also it was taken as an issue, as a problem of to solve by the state or by the authorities. The anti-Semitism was penalized. The anti-Semitism was also presented or qualified as racism, which was kind of a false universalism and false umbrella, because and here we come to the subject of the relationship between racism and anti-Semitism, which I don't want to open now, but so to leave it like that, the first counter-revolutionary movement against these cultural changes starts after Stalinism. So it's this years 56, 50, 57, and then the new first secretary, let's say, like a prime minister of Poland, claimed that now we have a Polish road to socialism, that everything were meaning Polish, not Jewish, and not Russian way to socialism. So this was, and then in '68 again, anti-Semitism was used by the government to conquer and divide, let's say, to manipulate on the situation and to win this situation against the opposition. So I would say that this is a very complicated issue, but I think you always have to remember about those both contradictory tendencies. One is this genuine anti-racist and anti-anti-Semitic tendency, and then there are also, like people who were also raised before the war. They have their mentality. They are rooted in the Polish culture. The canon of Polish culture is not changed, and also this communist revolution was just a few years, and it was definitely not enough to change the culture to its roots. And if it comes to the more progressive circles today and their approach to anti-Zionism, yes, I find it quite disturbing. My perspective is that progressive circles and leftist parties in Poland today, they used to copy some patterns from the West, because there is still this, specific legitimization of the Western trends in Eastern Europe. So they usually copy what is happening there, and those Western patterns overlap with the local context. So we have a local context, which is anti-Zionist campaign in '68, and on top of that, we have a modern anti-Zionist discourse, which comes from, for example, Great Britain or Germany. And I think they are not aware, or also they don't want to be aware of the dangerous potential of this dynamic.
Thank you so much, Laura. Anna, I suppose I keep wanting to ask the question, which is kind of my job really. It feels like it's to zoom out a little bit, or a lot, and to think about. So I was really interested in the idea that 67 and 68 was about. So it was aware that it was not okay anymore to define people as Jewish and to organize an anti-Semitic campaign, but so people were defined as Zionist instead. And I was really interested that some of the people defined as Zionists were not even people who knew that they were Jewish, and I'm presuming they a fortiori didn't know that they were Zionist either. So it's really interesting in terms of a kind of wider Western democratic discourse at the moment about the relationship between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism and hostility to Israel. So the kind of obvious question is, in Poland, this is an example of an explicit anti-Semitism being portrayed in the terms in the discourse of anti-Zionism. Is that correct? So generally I'm used to kind of scolding people a little who say that now, because people say, well, anti-Zionism is just a kind of code for anti-Semitism, and I say no, it's not. It's a kind of believed discourse. It's not people who know that they're anti-Semitic who are portraying their discourse in the language of anti-Zionism. But in Poland, your position, I think, is that it was that. Is that correct?
Absolutely. I mean, in Poland, it was, in my opinion, this slur, the Zionism as a slur, and the accusation of being Zionist was a pure absurd. It was really like, it had nothing to do, but literally nothing to do, both with Jewish community and with people who had Jewish origins, or they identify as Jews, or they didn't identify as Jews. As I said, most of them, they had even no clue sometimes where this Israel is. They were so rooted in the Polish circumstances, in the Polish environment. They were also from a lot of them. They were from completely secular atheist homes, but those of them who were from Jewish homes, from homes who kept Jewish traditions, they were also very much into Yiddish culture. And also the funny thing is that actually those families who had quite strong Jewish identities, most of those families were very anti-Zionist, because they perceived Zionism as a kind of the end of a Jewish Yiddish tradition. So as I said, some Yiddish activists, they decided to stay in Poland after the war, although everyone else were telling them, you are crazy to stay there, just because they were so dedicated and devoted to the Yiddish culture, and they really wanted to work on it and to rebuild it. And people who were forced to sign the statements against Israel in '68, from the people who were members of a Jewish community, like editors, for example, of Jewish magazines, or the director of a Jewish theater or something, they never said anything which would be Zionist in their spirit, in its spirit. So it was pure absurd, yet it worked, and this is, I think, really disturbing.
And the other kind of zooming out question that I wanted to ask was about the relationship between the campaigns. So the anti-Zionist campaign in the Soviet Union began earlier, I think, and certainly then in Czechoslovakia, with the Slansky trial, was the early 50s. And then also, was there a parallel campaign in East Germany, in the Democratic German Republic, in 1968?
Yes, Lansky trial and also the trials of the doctors in Soviet Union. There were like definitely anti-Semitic events organized by the states, but this is the earlier period. It's if it comes to the Eastern Germany, I must say I don't remember now. I remember there wasn't something happened there too. But I don't remember now what was that. I'm sorry. It's like, no, maybe someone else who is with us remember what was that in Eastern Germany.
And just another question about the expulsions from Poland. I mean, I assume that by that time in Germany, people were quite keen to leave. You know, people were trying to get over the wall. And what was the nature of those expulsions? Were people getting asylum in the West? Did people have quite a good experience of expulsion, or was it a sort of terrible experience of being made homeless?
Mm-hmm. Both, I think. I think it was all kinds of experiences all together. Sometimes, you know, like experienced by just one person, because. So one of the questions we ask ourselves in the research we conduct is what were the reasons someone decided to emigrate or someone decided to stay, and I would say that for now I can see this pattern that for people who had some options to stay abroad, they chose to emigrate. So for example, they had an experience of being abroad before, they had a chance for scholarship, they knew languages, they had families abroad in United States, in Scandinavia, in UK, in Germany, Western Germany, wherever, and Israel, of course. Those who decided to stay, they were mostly people who didn't have those opportunities, but also they felt relatively safe in Poland. For example, they experienced some nice gestures from their colleagues at work and from their boss, for example, who said, "Don't worry, nothing will happen to you. You will not lose your job, whatever happens." So they could feel relatively safe. Also, people who stayed those were people who were strongly connected to the Communist Party, and they were still communists. Some of them, they couldn't imagine to live in capitalist countries. They couldn't imagine also to, you know, abandon everything they were working on since before the war. They sacrificed so much for the communist movement, and they couldn't just drop it. So so it was all kinds of experiences, and of course some of those who emigrated, they managed to build new life and new careers abroad, but it doesn't mean that they didn't experience immigration as a horror, because immigration is always difficult. And imagine immigration which is forced by this kind of political events. So
there's two kinds of homelessness. There's the homelessness of being pushed out of Poland, but also the homelessness for the communists and for the anti-Zionists to be pushed out of the communist movement and the communist project.
Absolutely. I mean, some of our interlocutors, their parents were in the Communist Party, and some of them, they decided to step out of the Communist Party in '68. Some of them were expelled from the Communist Party, but some of them decided to quit. And I remember one of our interviewees who said, "I didn't want to go to Israel, but I had to take my father, who was a former communist, to take to Israel, because if he stayed in Poland one day longer, he would die." Yeah. Because it was such a disappointment on everything he was working for.
Could I tell a story?
Who are you?
I am in the US, John Goldman.
Let me just see if I can find your.
It pertains to this, what you're talking about.
Go on, John.
About 30 years ago in Sweden, I met a guy who's married to a friend of ours, and he had been I think probably a graduate student in Poland in the 60s. I don't remember exactly when. And he was sitting around one day talking with his buddies and other students, and they were talking about the Jewish, the problem of Jews being persecuted, and one of he said, I don't remember what he said, but one of his friends said, well, maybe it's time for you to leave too. What do you mean? He said, well, you're Jewish, aren't you? Maybe you should get out before they get on you. What? No, I'm not. Really? No. Why do you say that? So he goes home and he says to his mother, are we Jewish? And she said, well, yeah, we are. I never said anything to you about it before. And but yeah, we are. Oh, so then he started thinking, maybe I do need to get out. And in fact, he did. And he moved to Sweden, where he met this woman, and they were married, had children. But the part about it that struck me at the time was this, that he he had some ideas, I don't remember what they are anymore, intellectual plans or philosophy or something that he thought was, to bring people together. I think it was something like that. And he started visiting the various Swedish intellectuals to try to get their support to pursue it, to get some grants and, maybe form an organization of some sort. And they all, without exception, he said, were very polite to me, and they listened. And then they said, thank you very much. And I never heard from them again. Mm-hmm. And that's what he had faced in Sweden, just total. I missed the first part of your talk. I'm going to go back and catch it in the recording. But I just wanted to tell that story because I thought it was so. And I had one other related experience that struck me also. One day I went with a Swedish friend to a exhibition hall of the city, I don't know, I forget what it was, City Museum or something in Stockholm. And I was standing there and my friend was, there were big pictures of Jew. It was about 100 years of Jews in Sweden or something like that. And she was translating for me the Swedish on the card. Mm-hmm. I don't know Swedish. And after a little while, this older man sidled up to me, and you're Jewish, he said. I guess maybe I looked the part. And yeah. So he wanted to tell me his story. And he was comparing to the way people were, the immigrants at the time from Yugoslavia were being treated in Sweden, with open arms. They'd been invited to come and work in the factories, essentially. And he said, well, when I came here right after the war, a survivor of the Holocaust, there was no help at all. Nobody helped us. I had a job where I was mistreated and so on and so forth. So he's comparing now, at present, the Yugoslavs were being, we want you to become citizens. Here's help learning Swedish, et cetera, stipends to get them going, subsidies in apartments and so on. But the Jews who came over to Sweden, they were allowed to come some, but they weren't treated very well.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Thank you for those stories.
I mean, it's a really interesting story, and it's one I've heard before in different contexts, actually from before the Holocaust or during the Nazi rule in Germany. The story of people who really only found out about their own Jewishness because of an anti-Semitic campaign.
Right.
And that is some way to find out about your own Jewishness and to construct a Jewish identity, right? We have other questions.
Funny you should say that, David, because Hirsch sounds like a Jewish name to me.
Who said that?
Richard.
Well, it might well be. In fact, come to think of it, it's not really, because it's an Anglicization of Higorovich from I think from Ukraine. So there you go. It's a sort of Anglicization, which also in itself sounds Jewish. Carolina, let me come to you and invite you to ask the last question to Anna.
Thank you very much, Anna. Thank you for a great talk, and David for organizing, obviously, and to everyone for really interesting questions. My question is about, or my questions actually are about sort of more contemporary narratives of anti-Semitism. In fact, I think someone in the chat has already asked about how anti-Semitism these days might be manifesting. You've already mentioned a couple of examples like the blood libel and the idea of Jewish people being oversensitive to criticism. So we already have those. And to put it into context, I work on a project called Decoding Antisemitism, and we look at, I think David knows at least one of my colleagues actually, we analyze discourses actually not in Poland at the moment anyway, but in Germany, the UK and France. But I obviously, being Polish and knowing the Polish language, I kind of unofficially often apply the methodology of our project to the media content I see, and that's both what's happening in online comment sections and also in just the press itself. So I kind of wanted to ask a two-part question about the current kind of expressions of anti-Semitism in Poland, because I guess you might know more about this than I do and research it in more detail. So one thing that I see, like I said, in this kind of limited amount of informal research that I do is a narrative of guilt and accountability for anti-Semitism, both past and present. So whenever the topic of anti-Semitism comes up, there seems to be a lot of discussion of okay, but who was to blame? Was it the Germans, or is it the Germans now, or is it the Muslim population in Germany? Obviously, all of those very generalized and none of them, really factual. There's also talk of, okay, but maybe it was Polish people, maybe it was Jewish people themselves who are to blame for anti-Semitism. So whatever the scapegoat, it's always this need to find the one to blame, to push the responsibility onto someone. So that's one thing I see. And obviously there's a lot of othering, there's a lot of narrative of us and them, and which kind of erases people who are both Jewish and Polish, or who might identify as both. So that's one aspect of it. I was wondering if you would add, if you see those things or not, if you would add anything to it. And the other more specific media event is that is the Polish government's request, planned request to the German government for war reparations, and that's literally kind of happening as we speak, pretty much. And the request is to be phrased in a way that emphasizes Polish victims of the Second World War, but de-emphasizes Jewish victims of the Holocaust, even though Jewish Poles probably suffered more than non-Jewish Poles, although obviously it's not to limit anybody's suffering here, but just to say they perhaps should both be included in this, in the phrasing of it, and also that the way the government talks about the war reparations erases the role of non-Jewish Poles in anti-Jewish crimes, which we know have happened. You mentioned pogroms before, and like Yalta. I was wondering if you see either in the interviews or in other research that you have done, if you see any of this influencing the shape of anti-Semitism in Poland these days, or the discourse of anti-Semitism in Poland? Thank you.
Thank you, Carolina, for those questions. Actually, you mentioned the field that it's one of the most important and interesting for me, which is the current expressions of anti-Semitism. To decode it, I think we really need kind of a new methodology or a new tools to find out how to describe it and how to even find it sometimes. I would say that one of the crucial fields in which it manifests nowadays is historical politics. And it is not, it's a bit like with this anti-Semitism in '68. So no one says it's against Jews, but it's so much based and rooted in this constant competition with Holocaust in a historiographic fields. And it's also, it's really dangerous because not only politicians, but also historians are really involved in this competition, in this symmetrization of Jewish and Polish history, Jewish and Polish suffering, Jewish and Polish heroism, or Jewish and Polish uprisings, and so on. This symmetrization or this equation started a long time ago. Actually, the first signs of this equation was already after the war. For example, the number of the 3 million Polish Jews who died during the Shoah, it was immediately countered by saying about 3 million Poles who were also killed, and it was actually out of the blue, this number. It was just taken out of the blue to equate it with the numbers of Jewish victims, to present Poles as victims. And of course, this the stake of presenting Poles and Polish society as only victims is to hide the participation of Polish society and small Polish communities in Shoah. This is one of the stakes, at least. And I would say that that's why this historical politics, it's so important, because let me give just one example. In 2012, so it was before the current government, it was the liberal government, they announced the official day of remembrance of this nationalist guerrillas active after the war. And everyone knows, including even quite conservative historians, that they were anti-Semitic, they did ethnic cleansing, they were killing Jews. Then they justified those killings, saying that Jews are communists, so you can kill them, and it's morally justified because you can kill communists, and so on. But of course, it was like it was anti-Semitic violence. And now they have an official day of remembrance in Poland. Every year, 1st of March, we have to celebrate them, and the whole Poland is in Polish flags because of this. And the Polish presidents, the liberal one and now the conservative one, putting flowers on the monuments of them, and so on. And the books for the educational books for children are full of the heroic stories about those guerrillas. So this is just one of the examples, and no one says that this is, about that this whole anti-Semitic story is just under the carpet. But if you think about it from the broader perspective, if you think about it from the perspective of the integral history, then you can see that it's the way of I don't even find proper words for this, because it's not only excluding the Jewish history, it's a kind of a mocking on Jewish history. So this is the one part, I would say, or one agency here, this historical politics. And if it can, I'm thinking about the war reparation. Yes, sorry. Yeah, definitely you are right. I mean, it's also so it's again the same pattern, I would say. So you don't say anything openly that it's, you know, it's a competition or it's a gesture like, okay, you pay reparations to Jewish people, so pay to us as well, because we are victims as well. But it's quite obvious that this is the reason. I mean, it's quite obvious that it's this constant claim to get the same let's say recognition as the victims of the war as Jews. And I would say that there is a kind of obviousness in Poland, and I think it's much broader than just a conservative nationalist community, that Jewish suffering somehow unfairly covered the suffering of Poles as well, because, and this is this anti-Semitic stereotype that, you know, Jews are so good in presenting their suffering. So I think this is something that you don't say, but it's a ground on which all of these processes are growing.
Thank you.
Karina, thank you. Anna, thank you so much. I think that's all we have time for today. I have added in the chat links where people can sign up to keep in touch with the London Centre for the Study of Contemporary Antisemitism, and also a link to the programme of seminars of which this is a part, which is at the moment an international collaboration between ourselves and the Institute for the Study of Contemporary Antisemitism at Indiana University. And also, most importantly, this link via which you can donate money. The London Centre doesn't have any kind of proper institutional or other serious funding, and we don't charge people to come to these events, and we would be very happy if people donate the amount of money that they think would be appropriate to come to this event and to listen to Anna, which I think is a very large amount of money. And a number of people have asked about the text of the talk. So we will publish the video of this event hopefully within about a week or so, and if we can persuade Anna to write up the text of her talk, then we will be very pleased to publish it on the website of the London Centre. So we will try and persuade Anna to do that, and other people can do the same. So Anna, thank you very, very much.
I thank you, and also I have to just add one more thing. I'm really sorry for everyone who is taking part in the discussion in chat, because I was not able to read and talk at the same time, and I'm sure that there are so many interesting questions and comments there. David, is there a chance that I can read it afterwards?
Yes, I can download the text in the chat and send it to you. I think some of what happened in the chat came into the center of the discussion. I don't know, I think it's quite a nice, it can be quite a nice part of an online seminar that people have a sort of parallel chat, parallel to the main one. It can be quite uninspiring too at times, but I think this was not an example of that. So I will send that to you, Anna. Please, people, think about donating money to the London Centre, and have a look at the link for the whole programme between us and Indiana, and please drop your email into the right box, and we will keep in touch with you. Thank you, Anna. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, David, for inviting me, and yeah, I would like to join your calls to donate for the center, because I must say that the fact the center exists, it's so important for scholars like me that, yeah, I hope it will survive.
That's a brilliant thing to say, and it renews my wish for us to do more to help, actually, especially in Eastern Europe, to help scholars in Eastern Europe to find each other and to organize themselves. And if there's anything we can do to help that, then we're very, very happy to be part of that. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.